Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey Seahawks fans, welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk NFL prospects. This week, this show, we are on tight ends. We're at the tight end group. We've already done quarterbacks, running backs. Here are the tight ends. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, it's an interesting group overall, but we have a situation in Seattle that says, do they really need a tight end? So I figured we'd start our conversation off with that.
Well, yeah, let's have that conversation because I think it's interesting. So my philosophy on these sorts of things is you always want to just draft the best players available in the draft for the most part if you can. Sometimes that includes positions that don't seem like they're in immediate need for you. And the NFL is a hard place to work if you're a player, because injuries are prevalent and happen anytime and can happen. So it's tough. Contracts are always up. While we have 3 players under contract for this season, in 2024, we only have 1 player at the tight end position that's under contract, and Will Disley, who's also been susceptible to injury, left this year a few games with injury. We also have Noah Fant playing on a 5th-year option at tight end at $12,500,000 as a fully guaranteed contract. And then Colby Parkinson, who's emerged a little bit as a third tight end, kind of a pass-catching style red zone target. And we don't know if their team will continue to employ him as time goes forward. So that'll be really interesting to me as well. So while we do have 3 tight ends on the roster, 2 of which are in their final year of their contract, and that's kind of when you take a look at adding a piece in the draft to develop to have on your roster beyond that. How about that?
Yeah.
Keith?
So if they do draft a player, and I'm not saying they won't, because as you said, like if the draft falls in a way where a player like that is available, and the way your draft board looks, it's like you've got to look at it. It's, building a roster is more than just what's this next year. It's what's the year after that, as you were saying. If you do draft a player, I don't think you go into the training camp expecting 4 tight ends to make your roster. So
right.
You're looking at one of those 3 that you've got and being like, all right, who needs a tight end that will give us a draft pick for it? And so you take a guy and then turn around and trade a guy like Fant for a 4th round pick or Parkinson for a 5th and balance your roster that way.
I mean, you can certainly try to do that. Parkinson for me is right on that edge. He's clearly the 3rd tight end in Seattle. He's not the 2nd tight end. He's not the 1st. I don't know that he can develop into being the 1st primary target. He's not an inline blocker type. Parkinson would definitely be the guy that I would move on from. And I don't necessarily think that I would be afraid to cut Colby Parkinson just because I don't know that anybody's going to ship you a 5th round pick for him. It's possible.
I don't know. He showed a lot last year.
He did.
He did.
And I think he has more, actually. I really do. I think he can definitely
agree.
develop. But in our offense, I'm not sure. I mean, 3 tight ends alone on a roster is somewhat unusual. And then to have Colby Parkinson be that guy and expect him to get any more than 17 to 20 targets a year seems unrealistic to me.
I think part of it depends on if they do draft a tight end, which one do they draft? Yeah. Because there's a group here and they're all kind of unique. They all bring something different. It's not like here's tight end option 1 and here's tight end option 2, and it's just the same type of player but slightly different, slightly less. These are very different players at the top of the draft.
And we have 5 picks in the top 100. I mean, could Seattle conceivably use one of their top 5 picks on a tight end? Yeah, I could see a situation where that would happen. We were talking briefly right after our last show about that very situation. What would happen if one of the top, say, 2 or 3 tight ends in this draft were somehow available way below where they were projected to go, or on Seattle's big board as the best prospect available, regardless of position? What would they do? And we can talk about that. I don't see them drafting somebody in the first round, but if somebody were to fall, into the mid to late second round, that they were expecting to go much higher, that would be interesting. If somebody was sitting there at 123, for example, and with their 4th round pick that was expected to go much higher, and they just couldn't pass that up, there is a scenario where I think that they would draft the best player available, and if it was a tight end, I think they would do that. So let's talk about. I
was going to say, so who is that best player available at the tight end position to you?
I think everyone's consensus player, because of the consistency of play and just the skill set that he brings in, is Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame, 6'4", 265, runs a 4.65 40. He's a complete tight end. Now, for me personally, he's kind of a Will Disley type of player on steroids, if you will. He's definitely an inline blocking tight end, like the 4th or 5th best blocking tight end in the draft. He's also one of the best pass catchers, but he's also very short armed. He's just got over 32-inch arms. His wingspan is only 77 inches. This isn't a guy that's like 82, 83-inch wingspan. That's just this major, pterodactyl playing. Kind of a short, stocky guy, and kind of looks that way, but super athletic and just is a good football player. Like when you see Michael Mayer play, you look at him and just go, this guy is a player. This guy knows how to play football, plays it really well, very instinctual, gets open, knows how to use space and his body. And just overall a great prospect. I just don't know that he'd be a great fit on Seattle early in this draft, where you would have to take him. He's honestly projected to go anywhere from 10 to 20.
Yeah, I don't see him being worth a first round pick. He's one of those guys that doesn't do anything poorly, but I don't see a standout trait that says this is a guy that I need to draft in the first round.
He kind of reminded me of Jason Witten more than like a Kyle Pitts or Travis Kelce or George Kittle or somebody like that. Or Will Disley. He kind of reminds me of Will Disley a little bit.
He's not as good of a blocker as Will Disley. He's a better receiver, but he isn't a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle either. To me, he's a better version of Nick Vannett. Like, does everything okay.
He's better than that.
Yeah, no, it's what I mean. Like Nick Vannett did everything okay. He didn't really have a weakness, but he didn't have a strength. And I see.
I mean, this guy has 138 catches over the last 2 seasons, went over 800 yards in each season, 16 touchdowns. I mean, the guy, even without the blazing speed, was very accomplished in everything that he did. I mean, those type of numbers don't come from a guy that just does everything okay. I mean, he really was an amazing player, and his 82.1 run blocking grade was 4th in the nation as a run blocking tight end. So I think you're shortchanging him just a little bit, and that's just
yeah. I just
he might not have a first round grade, but he's a damn good player.
Run blocking is one thing. His pass blocking, I mean, that's what makes Will Disley valuable, is the fact that you can have him out there, and if this team dials up a blitz and you need your tight end to cover to block an elite defensive end, Will Disley can handle it. I'm not giving Michael Mayer that responsibility. I'm saying he is a better version of Nick Vannett. So he's a guy that doesn't really have a weakness, but I don't see that dominant strength at any point either. To me, he's a second round tight end that's going to be a long-term starter in the league, but I'm not taking him in round 1 at all.
Interesting. I mean, he does have a first round grade from most sites.
I know. I'm just saying, like, that's my take on him. If he was faster or had a more well-established route tree, then I'd be like, okay, well, then I might get into that round because you can depend on him as a receiver, but he's a guy that's going to move your chains as a receiver, but he is not a true receiving threat.
Do you know that he led the draft class with 20 receptions on targets of 10 plus yards downfield?
So was he dynamic? Was he dynamic, explosive in that? No, he wasn't.
No, when you watch him play, he's a lumbering player. He's a lumbering player, but man, he just happens to get it done. He's just one of those unique players, I think, in the NFL where there's no real outstanding Bruce Feldman's freak list type player with the huge long arms and the super fast for his size. He doesn't run a 4.48 40 at 600 or at 265 pounds. No,
but guys,
but he's he's a couple tenths of a second faster than Disley was at the 40, and Disley's an accomplished receiver in the NFL. I mean, he does really well at that.
He does okay. And to me, I just like I said, he's a guy who's going to have a long career, but he's not a Pro Bowler because there's not anything that he does that's special. There's nothing special. So I actually I know that he's kind of the consensus number 1, but to me, he's not. To me, when you start looking at the consensus number 1, who's going to have the best career out of all of the tight ends, I think you have to start with Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, because this is a guy who has those tangible skills, those things that are elite that can lead to a guy that's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler, which I don't think Musgrave has. You've got a guy that is.
You mean Mayer? You don't think?
Yeah, Mayer doesn't have that. Right. I think Musgrave does. So you've got a guy who's, 6'6", 255, but runs a 4.5 40, and can
possibly faster. We'll see. But he's a guy that he's got elite receiver traits, and a guy that is going to be able to give you Travis Kelce flashbacks as a player. And that, if I'm drafting a player in the first round, I'm looking for a player that has Pro Bowl potential, and I don't think Mayer does. Yeah, for a guy that only played in 2 games this last season and had 11 catches for 169 yards, he's got a lot of hype. And I agree with it because he's such a great athlete. His athleticism, is evident in his playing style, in his speed. If he can get into the 4.48 range, which I have heard that he will at the combine, he's going to be going in the first round in this draft, and not many sites have him going in the first round at this point. But I believe that he's a first round talent. I think he helped himself at the Senior Bowl, where teams needed him to come in and be the best tight end on the field, and he did that. He proved that. He ran faster than anybody else did. He created separation, had some mismatches during practice week. In the game, he had a couple of receptions. That wasn't where the focus was, though. How was he going to stand up in practice, 1-on-1 drills against some of these safeties and corners? And
he looked really good against them.
And he did. He looked really good. So this would be a very interesting, because he would have been a slam dunk first rounder had he played and had those 11 catches in 2 games and 169 yards translated into an entire season. He would have been a first round pick, no doubt about it, probably over Michael Mayer from
Absolutely.
Notre Dame, just because of the physicality of his game and upside. But he's not an inline blocker by any means.
He's not an inline blocker, but he's not an incompetent inline blocker. I mean, Jimmy Graham was never an inline blocker at any point in his career, and I think that Musgrave is better than Graham ever was. And so you're looking at a guy that can do a little there, but offers you so much in the passing game. He is a Travis Kelce in this draft.
Let's say Seattle takes care of business. Let's just say, for example, Seattle drops back from 5 to 10, picks up a second round draft pick in the process, picks its defensive player at 10. At 20 comes, maybe they drop back again, pick up an additional second or third round, late second, early third pick, and was sitting there at 27-ish. And Luke Musgrave was there. They had some other options, maybe some corners were sitting out there, an offensive lineman or two, some other viable opportunities. But Luke Musgrave was at the top of their board. What would they do?
I think at that point, I mean, you're going to look at things, and I'm going to be like, oh, take the offensive lineman because you need it. But a lot of the offensive linemen in that range are tackles, and they don't really need a tackle. What they need is interior guys, and I think you can get that later, especially if they've dropped back a couple times and they've got all these extra picks. You got a chance to get a guy that could be a Pro Bowler. Guys at the Senior Bowl scouts at the Senior Bowl were saying all pro, but I'm tempering that and saying Pro Bowler. I think you go ahead and take him, and then you turn around, instantly start working the phones and seeing if you can get something back for Noah Fant. And can you get a 4th round pick for him and add something to add another, defensive player or a running back or whatnot? Because that's what Noah Fant gives you, right? He's the receiving specialist out of that tight end room and a starter, and he's got kind of that expensive 5th-year option that he's going into. And if you can trade him and replace him with a guy that has a long-term future in Seattle, I think you do that.
Man, Twitter would freak out. That would be. I'm not
drafting players based on Twitter's reaction.
Well, you are building a roster, and you're taking a position of something that is not of immediate need, and you're upgrading a position, but at a positional cost, it would be hard. It would be hard to pass up on some of the defensive players in this draft, for example. Interior defensive tackles, or a premium. There might be a quarterback taken there that might be the future guy. Who knows? It would be a hard pick. I mean, I would just say it would be a hard pick. And I wouldn't want to be the GM in that spot because that would be a tough one.
Well, in the scenario that you gave, they've
sure.
moved back a couple of times in a couple of different spots. So now instead of having 5 picks in the top 100, they're looking at having 7 picks in the top 100. So now or 8 picks in the top 100. Now, one of those picks can be a luxury pick. But I look at it and I go, what would you rather have? Would you rather have, Noah Fant and a guard that you draft versus Musgrave, a 4th round pick, and $8 million in cap space? What
if a player like Brian Breesy or Keely Ringo, were the cornerback, were sitting there, and as well as Musgrave?
I'm not. To me, the cornerback, Seattle doesn't need a cornerback. They're 4 deep at cornerback. I like the cornerback room as is. I think if they draft someone, it should be 5th round or later. And so, that's not gonna help me. To me, it's going to be like Schmidt, the center out of Minnesota, that I would have a hard time passing on. But that's why I said a guard and not a center, because.
All right. Well, let's stay focused on this tight end class. Okay. So some of the other people have a guy like Dalton Kincaid out of Utah in the same sort of pocket value-wise as Musgrave. I don't see it personally, but I get it. The guy was highly productive in college. but not nearly the athlete. So 6'4", 240 pounds. He's not an inline guy. He's a wide receiver almost type player in a tight end body with a 4.7 140.
With a 4.7 40.
Right. And so the guy had 70 catches for 890 yards. Everyone's pegging him as being a high early day 2 type prospect. I don't see it. I see a guy like this falling, especially if he runs something like that, or even worse at the combine. He's not going to make it out of the 4th round. Even if he has that production, he only does one thing well, and he does it really slow in the NFL. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I don't see him as a high-end prospect. I see this as a guy that was a college performer and has put up stats, but that doesn't mean it translates into the NFL, because he doesn't block well enough to be a slow tight end in the NFL. He's a receiver who can't run, and it's just not a combination that works really well. I'm gonna have a hard time figuring out where he's gonna go.
He can be a tremendous route runner, crisp routes, have soft hands, catch everything that goes his way, which he did. He only had 2 career drops on 109 targets in college. It catches the ball. He's a good pass catcher, but that you can't get away from that speed at that size. It's like 6'4", 240. That's like DK Metcalf size almost, and runs like a half a second slower. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just not. It's not.
If he was, would you rather have him as a guy who doesn't block well, or Colby Parkinson, who's 3 inches taller, and runs like significantly better?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Colby Parkinson's, not going to cost me a draft pick, and even after his rookie contract is over, it's still going to be pretty cheap because he hasn't been. It's taken him some time to develop into a player at the NFL level. So
I'm not surprised you and I feel the same about this prospect.
Yeah.
Okay.
A guy that I find way more interesting is Darnell Washington out of Georgia.
Me too. God, like he's almost a tackle.
Yeah.
He's almost a tackle.
If this is the guy they draft, then Will Disley is on the player that's on the trade block, because this is a guy at 6'7", 270, right? He's big for a tight end.
And still runs a 4.6 340, which is crazy.
Still runs faster than Kincaid.
Right.
But he blocks kind of like Will Disley does. Like he is just an elite
and Will Disley
blocker.
ran a 4.8 540. So this guy runs a 2.6 940. Yeah. So you go watch this guy play. This guy's from Georgia. You've probably seen him out there. In fact, he was in that Oregon-Georgia game at the beginning of the year and just trucked Oregon players all around the field. It was nuts. But this guy, when you go watch him play, you're almost shocked that he's one of the biggest players on the field, and he's catching, balls down the field and trucking, safeties and linebackers that are trying to tackle him and stuff. It's actually kind of amusing.
They used it as just as a pass blocker, like essentially a right tackle on 72 plays this last year, and he gave up exactly 0 pressures. Yeah.
Wow. Plus he has a 81.4 run blocking grade, 5th among tight ends in college football as well.
He's a mismatch.
He's a mismatch waiting to happen.
He's a guy that I would love to have in a Seattle uniform, because he does everything that Seattle would want him to do. He can line up on the line and run block / pass block as good as an offensive lineman, but still get downfield. And he's not a dynamic athlete in the same way that Musgrave is, where that's going to be, someone that teams have to account for in the passing game, but he's going to be able to make plays. He's going to move the chains, all of that kind of stuff.
He's a chain mover is what he is.
Yeah. And he's going to do that while also being an elite blocking player.
He's going to be a 6th offensive lineman anytime you have him on the field, and also be able to leak out.
Yeah. So he's basically Will Disley, but with more speed and more size.
Right.
Because Will Disley is a 6th offensive lineman. And
you're also paying Will Disley like $11 million this year.
Yeah. That's the other part of it. Is Will Disley is a sixth offensive lineman. He's an elite blocker, just straight up one of the best in the NFL at blocking as a tight end. But he's not athletic. He's not fast. Any of those things. And
team loves Will Disley. I don't see them moving on, but you could paint a scenario where you could have Darnell Washington, Will Disley, and Noah Fant on your team and move on from Colby Parkinson as well.
Well, I think with Will Disley is because he's making what he is. That's a luxury that this team maybe can't afford. And if you get a guy like Washington in the draft, Disley becomes very expendable just because of his price tag. Now, if he was making, instead of 11, if he was making 5 or 6, then you go Noah Fant, Washington, and Disley, and you have the best tight end room in the NFL, without question. But at 11, it's harder.
They may restructure Disley's contract this year.
Yeah,
part of a situation to get some cap relief to pay.
Yep.
Gino. So where would you need to get Darnell Washington out of Georgia in this draft?
That is a good question, because I think you're going to need to take him in the second round.
I agree.
And you're going to need to take him early in round 2. So somewhere
like before pick 40, before pick 50.
Before pick 40. Or 40, 42, somewhere in there. Before pick 42.
Wow. So he would be on Seattle's radar potentially with their first of 2 second round picks.
Yeah.
We pick it currently at 37.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting how you and I have manufactured this conversation out of a situation where we don't necessarily have a need, but all of a sudden now we're starting to talk ourselves into it. It reminds me of the conversations that I would imagine go around, John Schneider and company, all the draft guys, the area scouts get together and have conversations, and sometimes they're about players like this, and they make you change your mind, your philosophy. They get you thinking about what would our team look like if we added this player, and what would we have to do to that position group in order to make it happen. And fascinating stuff. All right. Sam Laporta out of Iowa, it seems to be the consensus, like 5th overall talent at tight end. Senior at 6'4", 249 pounds, runs a 4.6, 640. Seems to be one of the best all around tight ends in the class as far as a pass catcher and a blocker.
I don't think he's there as a blocker, especially as a run blocker. I don't see it at all. I think that he is a guy with an extremely large route tree, like way more advanced route tree than a tight end usually has, especially when coming out of college, and is a nice mismatch if you put him on linebackers. But I think you line him up in line and ask him to block, and you're gonna be very disappointed.
Okay. What else do you got?
The only other player that I'm all that interested in at this point is Tucker Kraft. But he, you got to look at South Dakota State to find where this guy's from. 6'5", 255, runs a 4.77. Nice soft hands, good guy that gets up and makes a lot of catches that you don't see tight ends make. He's a big wide receiver-esque catch radius. And does those things well. Nice athleticism. He's not the greatest blocker because he doesn't have the elite lower body yet. He's kind of a high cut guy. But I think that he can get into the weight room and develop some of that and become better. And he's not a burner, but he is, he's reasonably decent in terms of his ability to run, and I think that he's going to be one of those guys that has a nice NFL career, even if it's never as the number one tight end on a roster.
Yeah, a couple other names to think about is Payne Durham, the tight end out of Purdue, performed well at the Senior Bowl. Everyone liked him, did great in meetings and so forth. Always a indicator of somebody that will probably end up getting drafted, is somebody that interviews well, does well, performs the way that they're supposed to at the Senior Bowl. Seems like teams like guys like that. Davis Allen out of Clemson, senior at 6'6", 250, played with a in a big school program there, did well. It's just kind of a general, all around decent tight end that will probably end up getting drafted in this draft. There's one other guy I was going to talk about. I was going to ask you. You mentioned being basically a tackle as a tight end. There's another guy that I had on my list. I'm trying to find it. I think it's Brevin Span-Ford out of Minnesota. He's a 6'7", 270-pound prospect. And basically he's just an inline blocker. He's not going to give you too much out of the receiving part of his game, but he led the nation in run blocking as a tight end at 82.8 and 13 big time blocks, quote unquote, from Pro Football Focus, led the nation. So somebody like that may get invited to camp. Other than that, those are most of the draftable guys that we've talked about. There's probably somebody else that comes in, Will Mallory out of Miami, maybe. But yeah, Seattle's an interesting thing because you just never know in a situation where you seem to have the position covered, especially when you're only talking about 3 tight ends on a roster. And we've got, the guy the perennial practice squad guy as well. Mabry that's sitting out there. Seattle may find that they go through the entire draft and not draft a tight end. And that's entirely possible as well. But you just never know how these things work because the way the draft boards are constructed and you're always trying to draft the best player available and you're not trying to press for positional need. Sometimes these things align and you just end up having to make that selection because it's the thing that helps your team the most. And so sometimes fans are surprised. Why did we draft a tight end? We don't need a tight end, blah, blah, blah. But you're always thinking ahead. A good GM has got, a 2, a 3, a 4, or 5 year plan as far as roster building is concerned. And really having 2 players come off of the books in 2024 is not that far away. Yep.
Did you look at Jaleel Billingsley at all?
No.
Guy that at one point people were like, watch this guy. He's going to be, Kyle Pitts. He's going to be, early first rounder. And then has done essentially nothing in college. 6'4", tight end who runs really well, but couldn't get on the field at Alabama. Finally moved to Texas. Didn't do much there. And then so I was like,
am I reading correctly that he's only 217 pounds?
You are reading that correctly. And I was like, how is this guy getting so much like positive press going into this last year? And then he's 200. That's not a tight end. That's a wide receiver.
Interesting. Yeah. NFL Draft Buzz has him ranked as the 7th overall tight end in the draft.
That's crazy to me. That's way too high. Yeah. Whereas the consensus mock at NFL Mock Draft Database has him as the 329th best prospect. So well outside of being drafted.
The one thing that he does have going for him at 6'4", 217 is a 4.55 40. I'm not saying that's blazing because you can find wide receivers at that weight and height, maybe not the height so much, but at that weight run much faster than that. And so I'm not exactly sure how he fits into a NFL roster. He might be more of an XFL player to me.
Yeah. I mean, he could be an NFL player just because, okay, so you're looking at a a big
Hybrid.
wide receiver who's not a burner, but is very physical in their play style because they're used to lining up at tight end and battling that way. I don't know. I just saw him and I was like, oh, this is a guy that I remember reading about. There's all this press. And then 217. Wait, what?
Well, he has no production.
Yeah.
So you go look at all his production. He's played 9 games, had 2 receptions for 16 yards. In 2020, he played 12 games, 18 catches. In 15 games and 17 catches in 2021. Last year, he transferred to Texas and played in 4 games, had 3 catches for 38 yards. What am I missing here?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes, people get attached to a specific profile and athletic traits and so forth, and don't actually look at the football player part of this thing. And that's the important part, really. That's all I got in this list. Do I see Seattle drafting a tight end on purpose? No. Could I see them drafting a tight end in this draft? Yes.
Well, we didn't mean to draft a tight end, but we filled out the wrong name on the card, so we ended up with this
right.
guy.
Right. Sometimes stuff happens in the NFL. You just never know. Like you said, Disley's got a cap hit, that the team might not feel comfortable with, and maybe they can't.
It's one of those things where I'd be willing to bet, given their cap situation, the fact that they need to re-sign Geno, that they have already talked with Disley's agent about restructuring his deal. And if they can't find, a restructure agreement that's going to work, Disley may not play on that contract because $11 million is a lot for a blocking tight end.
Yeah.
Even a really good blocking tight end, he's still a blocking tight end.
The weird thing is when you go out to over the cap and you take a look at the tight ends out there, which I will do right now. And you look at Will Disley. Will Disley's down the list 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. He's the 17th highest paid tight end in the league now. And so it's not like that's an aberration. It's just it is what it is. The position has definitely increased, over time, and it just doesn't seem worth it to us necessarily. But that doesn't mean that salary is out of whack.
Well, true, but at the same time, you look at the people who are above him on the list, and you're going to see a lot of guys that are extremely productive in the passing game, and he's not. He's
Darrell Waller, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews,
right. David Njoku, right? You're Hunter Henry. You're looking at all these guys that are productive.
Yes.
Productive in the passing game.
Right.
And that's not his strength. Now, also, he's, of all the guys, there's nobody younger than him, above him on that list. And so that also is part of it. He's a younger player that may get a chance to, get out there and continue to improve because he's only 27.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, pre June 1st, dead money cap savings. So we'd have $6.2 million in dead cap, $2.99 million in savings if we were to just outright cut him. That flip-flops in 2024. But if you restructure him, you can get that, his cap number is 9.1 this year, 10.1 next year. If you could get his cap number into the 4 range and restructure him and add another year and so forth, I would do that. But you'd be pushing money out. I mean, you'd make 2024 probably be in the 12 range and 2025 be in the 14 range. But you'd probably also be able to structure it in a way where you could move on if you needed to.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy that is, he'll be 28 at the end of this contract after 2024. Going into his 29-year season, this is still a young player. You could add a couple years to his deal, maybe bring his average per year down a little bit, so it's more kind of in line with where he's at athletically at this point because of the injuries, and get him, stretch it out, get this first year down, and keep him under 10.
Who would you rather have on your roster, Will Disley or Noah Fant?
That's a good question. Probably Noah Fant, because I like what he offers as a receiver. But it's hard to argue against Will Disley, given Seattle's desire to run the football effectively. And you got to have, they need that guy at tight end. It just, the offense works better. And
Noah Fant is going to bring you a little bit more dynamic receiving ability. Obviously, he's a year younger, and he just doesn't have the injury history.
Yeah.
So. But he's also, we're going to be paying him this year, though.
He's not the blocker, but he is a guy that he's a significantly better receiving threat.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so his cap number this year isn't too bad. It's 6.85. I thought it was a little higher, but his 5th year option is 6.85. That's a pretty decent. That's fully guaranteed, but that's pretty decent.
It doesn't matter. That's that is still only 66% of what Disley's cap is in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
It's 60% of what Disley's cap number is in 2024. So he's definitely the bargain of the two for the next 2 seasons.
All right, let's get out of here. Tight end finished. Put a cap on it. Next is going to be wide receivers. We'll get together this next week and record again. We'll do the wide receiver position group. We did our schedule for through May this last weekend, and we're doing a whole bunch of draft prospect shows. If you want to stick around for those through February, we're doing a NFL Combine preview and a review show at the end of February and the first part of March. And then we'll start back into the prospects a little bit. We'll go into free agency. After free agency, we'll drop back into the prospects, and we'll just kind of continue that pattern all the way through April until we hit the NFL draft and get everybody ready for the Seahawks offseason, which for us is one of the funner times of the year for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com is the website. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. Hit the subscribe button and share it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWC Hawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.